China's ruling Communist Party decision to eradicate term limits coming as China proclaims an era of greatness. The country's president Xi Jinping says that it will take its rightful place atop the global power structure. But the president's efforts to sustain China's trajectory in the world domination now is leaving a whole lot of people fearful, not just of the resurgence of strongmen in China, but around the world. Joining me now to discuss, Gillian Melcher, Wall Street Journal editorial page writer, Evan Siegfried, president of Some Consulting and author of GPS, and Derek Scissors, American Enterprise Institute resident scholar. Derek, let me start with you. China is no longer hiding its ambitions to supplant America as the world's leader, perhaps have the world's de facto currency or default currency, and all the other things that come along with it. This move, how does it help them with that goal?
Well, there's a positive and a negative side, of course. Positive side is continuity. Xi Jinping is going to stay in power indefinitely, 10, 15, 20 more years. They're going to get the same kinds of policies. He's absolutely dedicated to Chinese greatness, so you're not going to have someone focused on something else, reversing policy in the middle. But the risk is that he's going to make mistakes. It's the risk with all dictators. He seems to be a very prickly person, maybe reacting too much to personal insults instead of thinking about what's good for China. So it's going to help them because their policies are going to be consistent, but they may be the wrong policies from the get-go because he doesn't have the right temperament to lead a world power.
Both of you guys have been to China or understand China very well. Jillian, let me start with you. I mean, you go from president to emperor. You could be prickly, I guess, right? So, and it's hard to argue that they haven't made some enormous strides since he's been in power.
Sure. I think what you've seen in particularly the Deng Xiaoping years was a shift to a social compact that focused on we'll give you economic prosperity and you give us your political freedom in exchange for that. I think that's a really scary compromise to be making under a leader like Xi Jinping. He's assuming the same name, the Ling Xue, that Mao Zedong was. And in addition to that, I think if you look at some of the rollbacks of freedom and human rights, religious policy is a really good place to look at that. In Jiangxi province, he actually was going through demanding that people take down pictures of Jesus and put up his face. So I think that gives you some insight into the totalitarian mindset that he has.
This new name that he's adopted, what does it mean?
It's a name that Mao used, and it basically means like the top leader. It's a very all-encompassing authoritative term, and it's one that hasn't been used since Mao. So the fact that he's using it is symbolically important.
This, of course, Evan, as we're trying to renegotiate trade deals, stop them from stealing trillions and billions of dollars of intellectual property every single year. And, of course, we like to thwart their global ambitions. I don't know how we could do it.
Well, it's very hard to do it because what China does, and it's very smart, they engage in predatory aid with the goal of they go to a country and say, we're going to give you aid to help you build a road, a hospital, a stadium, what have you. And in exchange, you're going to also give us a great rate on repaying of the loans. Oh, and by the way, you're going to give us access to our natural resources. Oh, and you're going to buy Chinese products. They push out the American consumer and the American companies in favor of Chinese companies, and they also geopolitically and economically colonize these countries. It's not countries that are just in Southeast Asia. It's all across the globe. They're taking over Greece because of when Greece had the debt crisis. They bailed them out with no strings attached. They're taking over in the Caribbean, Central America. You've seen the Bahamas, Jamaica, Trinidad, all over the world.
And I've been to those places and I've seen where they bring in their own workers. They don't even train the locals. They don't give them any jobs.
They use a government-owned construction company called China State Construction Engineering Corporation, who actually brings in their own workers, massive human rights abuses. They put them in 40-foot-long Quonset huts with no air conditioning. They cover up worker deaths. They take away their passports. It never benefits the local economy, and the United States can't counter it.
You know, I think it's important here to make the point about China doing this and the case against American retreat. What we saw in the 80s was an assertive United States, and with that we saw a flow of democracy, the acceptance of a liberal Western system. And as we've seen the United States retreat across the world, not just specific to China, but countries are becoming less free.
Right. Well, Derek, I mean, is it about isolationism or just the idea that Americans are tired of being the sheriff of the world?
Yeah, I mean, we're obviously bearing some burdens around the world that have nothing to do with China. The Middle East doesn't really have very much to do with China. And if they're focused on just expanding Chinese greatness, whatever that means, and we're focused on taking care of the whole world, that's a big burden for us to bear. In a straight competition, the U.S. against China, I like our chances. But if we're supposed to compete with the Chinese and all these countries, as the other commentators have mentioned, and stabilize the Middle East and defend against Russian aggression in Europe, that's a lot for us to do. I think American priorities are going to have to be sharpened in the face of China's rise and Xi Jinping's
There's no doubt about
coronation.
it. This is a serious, serious problem and a serious issue.